program. Margaret, appreciate the introduction there real quick. So in today's program, you're going to hear from Aamir Paul, President and CEO of Schneider Electric, North America, and Gil Quiniones, CEO of ComEd. Aamir is going to explore Schneider's pivotal role in energy transformation, highlighting their mission to serve as the digital partner for sustainability and efficiency. Simultaneously, Gil will illuminate ComEd's extensive reach and adaptness in connecting customers with electrification and the company's proactive response to the ongoing energy transition. Guiding the insightful conversation will be Jennifer Scanlon, President and CEO of UL Solutions. Jennifer's moderation will offer key insights into the driving forces behind the push towards electrification, with a specific focus on addressing the urgent imperative to counteract climate change. Again, thank you for all being here today. And Jennifer, Aamir, and Gil.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And I'm just thrilled to be here. Jeff and Margaret, those were very kind introductions, and we appreciate them. I'm Jenny Scanlon, and I am your moderator today, and have just two wonderful, insightful speakers here with me. And it's great to see such a packed house. Many friendly faces, many customers, many colleagues, and the broader Chicago business community. We know this is an important topic. This topic, the electrification of everything, is enormous. And we're certainly not going to be able to do full justice to it in a single hour. But we're going to have a lively discussion, and we're going to hit really the bigger issues related to our global energy transition. So we'll have thoughtful questions and answers from both of our guests, Aamir and Gil. And you know, as was mentioned, as President and CEO of UL Solutions, we have a keen interest in the electrification of everything. And it's a mega trend, and it has important implications for every single one of us. We at UL Solutions provide testing, inspection, and certification services, as well as complementary software and advisory services. We've been working for a safer world since 1894, and that was the time when electricity actually was just starting to enter people's homes, and it was the new and different technology of the day. So we got our start right here in Chicago with the safety considerations that went along with electricity. And it was part of the World's Fair, and our founder, William Henry Merrill Jr., had come to Chicago from MIT to assess the fire risks at the World's Fair. And that then became our first testing lab that UL Solutions, back then incorporated as Underwriters Laboratories, started in 1903. So we have a rich history, and we have been working alongside the cutting edge developments that you're going to hear from. And today, the products that we help customers bring to market are powered differently. And we're operating our business in light of this rapidly changing world associated with the need for more sustainable energy sources. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the iconic UL mark that will tell you that the products that are on the places where you live, you work, and you play have met certification standards and are safer. So we're going to get to some of these key topics, but I want to talk about, let's start with, electrification is being driven to counter the effects of climate change. I think we're all familiar with the Paris Agreement that has the call to action to limit the Earth's temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So we're going to get to that. We are not on the trajectory to accomplish that goal. And there's an intergovernment panel on climate change, which is part of the UN body for assessing the science related to climate change. And the estimates so far are that just a short 4 years ago, we were already at plus 1.1 degrees of that 1.5. So we must work harder, and that's what we're going to talk about. I think everybody knows that Thomas Edison invented the incandescent light bulb in the late 19th century. And you've all heard of Nikola Tesla, thanks to the EVs that are now driving about the world with his moniker on them. But you may not know about the war of the currents. And that's when those two inventors, the war that they waged over Edison's favored DC model, direct current, versus Tesla's alternating current, AC. So AC/DC is not just a band, but it was the war of the currents. And these were really differing methods of power distribution and transmission. And they continue in the headlines today. So a little bit of education. Why? Why do we care, AC versus DC? Well, here's what happened. In that early battle, the AC advocates prevailed, despite the fact that AC is a more challenging safety profile. And today, our electricity is still predominantly delivered by alternating current. But computers, LEDs, solar cells, and EVs all run on DC power. So better methods are now available for converting DC to the higher and lower voltages. And as DC is becoming more stable, it is more stable, companies are finding ways of using high voltage direct current to transmit or transport electricity across longer distances with less electricity loss. And we see this. The Department of Energy is advocating for this, and we see it in our own work with our customers. So these types of changes are happening every single day across the entire electrical ecosystem. And it starts with generation, it goes to transmission, it goes to storage, it goes to usage. And that's the larger landscape. So technology is contributing from safety to security. We've got increasing complexity. We've got greater collaboration required. And that is my overview of the big picture and the context by which we're going to ask Gil and Aamir to speak. So let's start. We're going to delve into key challenges and opportunities of the energy management and industrial electrical utility industry. And we're going to especially cover energy storage, microgrids, and usage. So this is a great topic, Aamir and Gil. And we've got the backdrop. I talked about how we got to this point, 130 years past those current wars. And now let's talk about each of you and your companies and the roles that you play. Aamir, I'm going to start with you. 13 years in this technology sector, and then you joined Schneider Electric over a decade ago. Today, you lead the operations of this very large global company's very fastest growing region here in North America. So can you elaborate on what brought you to Schneider and what your company's role is in the electrical transformation, and then what excites you?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. You talked about the history of UL. Schneider Electric is a 190-year-old company. So I had the privilege of attending Northwestern, go Cats. Yeah, come on, there got to be more than a few in the room, right? Especially in this room. And after that, I joined Dell, and I joined Dell in the late 90s, or as kids now say, late 19th century, which is deeply depressing.
Yeah.
But the PC revolution had already happened. The cloud computing revolution that was led by Andy Jassy at Amazon came later, and in between was the mobility transition. So after 13 years at Dell, when I decided I wanted to do something else, I had two goals in mind. One, to come home to Chicago. My parents still live in the same building they lived for the last 30 years. And second, to be at the beginning of something. And that's where I had never honestly even considered the energy industry. But I met some people who were working at Schneider Electric. I learned about what we were working on. And this is in 2012. So some of the things that are obvious today weren't obvious, but this conversation about the biggest change in infrastructure is going to happen not in telecommunications, not in just data, but actually in source energy, was a super interesting conversation. I still wasn't sure. So I joined with some trepidation, but at least it was bringing me back home to Chicago. Now, a decade later, I have more conviction on the company, on our mission, on what we're trying to do. And as you said, we have to go much faster. Just one sense of Schneider, we in the US are a product of American companies. So Square D, Detroit Fuses, was an exhibitor at Navy Pier during the City of Lights, American Power Conversion, UPC, UPS Company, ASCO, Backup Technologies, Aviva, OSI. So we've really acquired and then integrated these technologies, and we'll talk a lot more about it. And I believe that we have an opportunity right now to leapfrog in terms of how we drive policy. And one of the Winston Churchill quotes about Americans is one I always come back to, which is you can always rely on Americans to do the right thing once they've exhausted all other options. So I think in the energy transition, we've tried everything else, and now it's time to do the right thing.
Well, it is an exciting time, and it really is the beginning of this transition. And Gil, let's talk about ComEd's role in this. You focus on the source and the supply of energy. So give us some of your corporate history and then talk about some of the innovation happening at ComEd.
Yeah. Well, ComEd is the electric utility, transmission and distribution utility here in Northern Illinois. And the grid really is the enabler for electrification. And that's the role that we have to play. If you look at the last 10 years, ComEd invested in our grid to really modernize it and make it more efficient, make it more reliable. So the ComEd grid came from what I would say 10 plus years ago as the worst performing grid in the United States to today, the most reliable electric utility in the United States. And so,
That's good.
thank you. And after our state passed the Climate Equitable Jobs Act and also signed the US Climate Alliance, which is basically that our state will meet the Paris Agreement goals, we then added our innovation story to include the need to evolve this electricity transformation that's happening, the energy transition, and also to make sure that the transition is equitable and orderly and affordable. So instead of just being focused on modernizing our grid, we want to make sure that there is an orderly, equitable, reliable, and affordable transition in our state.
Well, it's extremely important. And it gets to, this exciting set of steps that we have to take to get to a net zero world and really thinking about how we disrupt the ways in which we manage that electrical infrastructure. So as part of this transition, government incentives are out there. And we've got the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We've got the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. Many other tailwinds that are really helping propel this transition. And so, Aamir, how do we make the most of this moment of where our government is focusing? And then what are some of the solutions that you're putting forth to help customers use energy efficiently?
So first of all, I think both at the federal level and the state level, this policy environment is an incredible catalyst. And it's a catalyst for the private sector to do more. And already we've seen that private investment that has been facilitated by this federal and state investment is outpacing the government spend, right? So government's role is to catalyze these things. And by the way, governments all over the world are doing this. The US was late, and we have an opportunity to catch up. But I'm very, very encouraged by that environment at every level. You also see it in reshoring and manufacturing. If you look at net manufacturing starts in the US, they're at an all-time high. In fact, the highest in the last 3 decades because of that combination of supply chain de-risking, reshoring, and the investments in this capital deployment. Now, I think in terms of where do you start, a couple of things, right? At every level, we have the technologies to solve 70% of the problem. So immediately when we talk about climate change and carbon abatement, we talk about the hard-to-abate sectors. But imagine if you had to walk a journey and the first 80% of the journey was easy. Would you start, or would you spend the time worrying about what you did at the last 20%? And that's sort of what we're doing, right? We're spending a lot of energy, no pun intended, talking about the last 20%. And 70% of the technologies, solutions, partnerships needed, we have to deploy. So I'll give you one example. CEJA, Governor Pritzker, and I think you were there, was signed at Shedd Aquarium. Shedd Aquarium is a building that at every level, from a building management standpoint, solar, battery backup, Schneider Electric has partnered with for a long time. It runs close to net zero operations because of those technologies. Not based on future technologies, not based on future grid policy, today. And as they like to say, they have a hierarchy of needs, the animals, the guests, and the employees, and they're able to deliver that outcome today. So a lot of the technology is needed for decarbonization of buildings, transport, homes, optimization of grid. It's not a technology problem, it's an intent problem, and it's about incenting business leaders and communities to start driving. So I'm very, very encouraged by the context, but all of us have to pick up that catalyst and drive it in our own sectors and our own spaces.
So let's go a little deeper just on that, we could call it the prioritization of the demand efficiency, essentially getting to a net zero demand, that we all insist upon that. And when you look at those types of incentives, commercial, residential, manufacturing, how do you think about how we get that mindset to be changed, to use the 70% that were there?
Well, I think in businesses, we're starting to see that demand side outcome accelerate pretty quickly because people are seeing this convergence of digitization helping, right? If you think of why are you reducing carbon, you can obviously have this good actor mindset, the morality of it, contributing to a better environment, but you're also paying less. It's an efficiency problem. And I think using digital tools and making businesses more efficient by reducing the waste in your system is a critically important start. In a city, 40% of the waste happens in buildings. We have a lot of buildings in Chicago that are unoccupied. How can we retrofit them more effectively to reduce that equation? That's HVAC systems, that's deploying more effective sensors, that's making sure that the building is operating in a way that serves its occupants when they're there. In communities, we can deploy microgrids more effectively, and we'll talk about that. And giving people the choice of the aggregated outcomes. So for example, when you have solar alone, as a homeowner, you have one set of outcomes. When you couple that solar with battery and an EV, you start becoming a prosumer. We are launching now a simplified home hold solution, and so are our competitors that'll make that a lot easier, right? The keynote at CES was from Siemens, and there's a reason for that, and we're glad they did that because making your home smart isn't about smart speakers or video cameras, it's actually having your home be more efficient in how it takes care of you. And then finally, in industry, one of the things we're looking at is the combination of different solutions. So these hydrogen hubs that are going to be juxtapositioned with the oil and gas industry offer bridging solutions that make a lot of sense that we bring to bear. So I think in all of these, you have to have the why be more than just the social outcome that's critically important, but there's an efficiency outcome that hits the bottom line as well. And then when you can combine those two incentives, you can get a lot of momentum.
Well, to get to that social outcome and that efficiency outcome, a lot of electricity is going to be needed. So, Gil, considering the increasing trend, how are you and ComEd prepping for this growing demand? And how are you going to ensure that it continues to be reliable? So that progress that you made from the worst to the best, how are you going to think about that and keeping up with the needs of your customers?
Well, we certainly need to continue to invest in our grid. We did a study to show that if we follow the trajectory of CEJA, the Climate Equitable Jobs Act, and the US Climate Alliance goal to meet Paris Agreement of net zero by 2050, that the grid would at least have to double over that time period. Maybe even more, double to triple the size of the grid because of the tremendous electric demand. If we electrify transportation, if we electrify some manufacturing, if we electrify buildings, etc., that is going to drive electric demand growth. We also need to invest to modernize the grid, to make it more resilient. We have a lot more, for example, last year, we had the most amount of tornadoes touch down in our state, in the United States, compared to the entire all of the states in the United States. More severe, more intense weather events that we need to respond to make sure that our grid is there when it's needed, especially as we electrify more and more loads. In our service territory, we're seeing tremendous growth. Data centers, we're becoming a hub for data centers in Northern Illinois. We have about 5,000 megawatt. A megawatt supplies about roughly 1,000 residential homes. We have 5,000 megawatts in the queue that are in engineering, meaning we're already working with those data centers, and another 9,000, over 9,000 in the pipeline. Our state is attracting EV manufacturers, Rivian, Lion Electric. I don't know whether you've heard Lion Electric, which is a school bus electric manufacturer in Joliet. Stellantis, President Biden announced last year that they're going to retool that plant and make some more electric vehicles and battery storage. Tremendous growth in solar in our service territory, over 30% growth in solar, rooftop solar, commercial and industrial solar. There's about close to 20,000 plus or minus in the queue for wind farms and solar farms to be connected to our grid. So we're cleaning the supply of electricity. Now we're fortunate, we have 11,000 megawatts of nuclear, installed nuclear capacity here in our state. In fact, we have, ComEd, we have the capacity, the availability to supply 95% clean energy to all of our customers, which is an unbelievable competitive advantage for our state. So we are excited. We're excited. We're planning for this growth. We're planning for this energy transition. And we're going to be ready when our customers starting to adopt the technologies like EV, battery storage, solar, heat pumps. You're going to hear more and more about heat pumps for hot water heating and space heating. So those are the things that we're already seeing in our service territory. And we want to make sure that we are partners on every step of that journey for our customers, whether they're residential customers or commercial and industrial customers.
I'm going to take it one level deeper on that because I think it's so fascinating to hear about all of these different energy sources. You know, to double the grid, that composition, that mix of those resources is going to change. And so when you think about distributed energy resources and the impact on the grid, how are you thinking about the, you know, both the pace, the security, the sustainability, the reliability of moving down, you know, moving up that trajectory?
Yeah. Well, it's exciting because you mentioned about Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. The grid really for over 100 years been pretty much the same. There's always a joke amongst us engineers that if they come back, they would still recognize the electric grid. Because it was designed to be a centralized system. We have big power plants, transmission, the lines that you see along the highways when you're driving, and then distribution, the wires that connect to your homes and businesses. And it was a one-way power flow from transmission to use. That is completely changing now. Now it's becoming more and more decentralized. Aamir mentioned about prosumer. Customers are producing and storing their own electricity. So imagine this one-way system now becoming more decentralized. One-way power flow to now multitudes of power flows in the system. And that needs to be orchestrated well. Electricity production and demand must match all the time. And companies like Schneider, they develop technologies to help us apply those technologies to orchestrate this new grid. Companies like UL make sure the devices and the equipment that are attached to our grid are safe to operate. So this is really an ecosystem that we are planning for to meet that future need. The first thing we need to do is energy efficiency. And we talked about that. Yeah. Aamir talked about that. Not only a business imperative, but it is the most cost-effective way to reduce carbon. In our service territory, we've saved our customers $8 billion in their electric bills because of our energy efficiency programs. So we lead with energy efficiency, and then we make sure that we enable distributed energy resources like solar, wind, battery storage, and we prepare the grid for electric vehicles. What does that mean? Well, we want to make sure the grid is ready when our customers want to plug and charge their electric vehicles. So charging stations, optimum placements. Where do you put public charging stations? We're working with the state and local governments to make sure that that is optimized. So things of that nature, we're thinking ahead, we're planning ahead. We have what we call hosting capacity maps now, where customers, if you want to plug into the grid, you can, okay, on this spot you can plug, not on this spot. And so those are the kind of things that we're doing to make sure that this energy transition and the vision of our state and our contribution to our climate goals are achieved.
You know, it's that adage, it starts so slowly and then happens so quickly.
Absolutely.
And you think about, you know, Edison and Tesla showing up today, 130 years later, and it being very recognizable. But what you describe is going to happen so quickly.
Absolutely.
And one of those drivers of that speed is this shift to sustainability. And, you know, Aamir, as you mentioned, you know, having the right motivations, I'm not even gonna call them incentives, but motivations to be sustainable. And Schneider Electric consistently ranks as one of the world's most sustainable corporations. So tell us about, I think we're all curious, how does your company reduce your own carbon emissions and also motivate that increase in renewable energy adoption?
I think, look, first of all, it's part of our culture, right? The why of why you come to work at Schneider Electric is you have a set of beliefs of the kind of company you want to be part of. You want to be part of the solution. You want to make sure everything you do every day is solving a problem. And Gwen Shotwell, who's the CEO, COO of SpaceX, has a great line. She says her job is to create a plan B for humanity. Pretty cool. I also admire her upward management skills. But the rest of us are working on plan A for humanity. And, you know, plan A seems a lot more doable if we can work together more effectively. So the first thing of the why, I think, matters. And I think we spend a lot of time on that. It's a deep part of our culture. It's part of who we are. It's how we recruit people. And I think we live that value every day. Then, you know, you mentioned Corporate Knights, a Canadian agency. We've been in the top 10 most sustainable companies in the world 13 years in a row. So how do we do that? Internally, we've created a very clear roadmap, and we publish our results the same way we do with our earnings outcome. The executive committee, myself included, are compensated based on achieving those outcomes. So we have a roadmap. By 2025, we'll be carbon neutral with offsets in our own operations. That's Scope 1 and Scope 2 from the SBTI methodology. Then by 2030, we will stop using offsets in Scope 1 and Scope 2. Then 2040, we'll get carbon neutral across our value chain. And by 2050, carbon neutral or net zero with no offsets at all. So we've got very clear milestones on how we're going to achieve that. And every decision we make, where we open a factory, what sort of technology we buy, the companies, when we're acquiring them from an M&A standpoint, go through that mechanism. We also think a lot about embodied carbon to the point made about energy sources, right? We're investing in places where the input energy is cleaner. So it's part of every decision we make. And then with our clients, it's really about empowering them in an end-to-end system. So with our suppliers, we've created a program for the top 1,000 suppliers where we will help them reduce their carbon footprint. We actually buy $30 billion of power in this country on behalf of our clients as a PPA provider, so we can help them source clean energy. We've created forums, so recently with Micron and Intel and Applied Materials and Google, we launched a Catalyze program for the semiconductor supply chain because data centers were an energy consumer, but now with AI data centers, the scale of that energy consumption is going exponential, literally. And we're going to run out of power in parts of the country. In fact, we are, and we're moving data center build out from the Virginia corridor to places like Illinois precisely for that reason, in addition to the clean energy. So AI adoption relies on energy efficiency in a very big way. And so making sure that supply base can decarbonize. And then finally, helping them at an atomic level in their operations. So in the products we design, but also the services we offer. At every stage, we sit down and we help them assess their carbon. People ask me, where do we start? And we say, do you know how much you're using? Have you just done the baseline assessment of usage? Then once you understand that, you have an opportunity of waste reduction, efficiency, et cetera. So I see this as the same basic methodology we apply everywhere else, where I think just like policies catalyze it in a country, leadership, incentive, and culture can catalyze it in the company. And then the technologies and partners are there to help people make progress and quick progress.
Well, if you don't measure it, you can't improve it. So
Exactly.
I think that's a great place to start with your customers. And I want to go back to connecting the dots earlier about getting to the 70% we have the mechanisms to do. And I think what I heard you say when you talked about your sustainability roadmap of what you're going to do by 2030, by 2040, by 2050, it sounds like you're applying the 70% for now to 2030, and you're going to figure out the other 30% through this methodical process that you're measuring at every step of the way. How are you thinking about that?
I'll give you the example that I'm most proud of. One of the examples I'm most proud of. My team is here, so I'm going to get a lot of email later about one of the examples. Lexington, Kentucky, 64-year-old factory. They make the panel boards that go in your home. So if you go home and you go to panel board, please don't touch anything. But if a breaker trips, 4 out of 10 homes have our content in them. It's a square D breaker, right? We make that panel board. And we decided that we were going to start drinking our own champagne. In the US, we say eat our own dog food, pick your version. The French version is drink your own champagne, so we went with that. And we said, let's deploy all our technologies with 2 conditions. The operating team in the plant makes the decision of what they use and what they don't. And second condition, the operating team in the plant must deliver the efficiency outcomes with which they pay after the first year in which we catalyze the program. So there's no free lunch after that, right? We will help you get started, but then you have to save your way to the next wave of investment. So 5-6 years ago, we started this program. We deployed our Aviva software technology. We deployed our EcoStruxure stack, which is our digital connectivity solution. We deployed our latest robotic solutions. Today, Lexington, Kentucky, the same 64-year-old facility, is a World Economic Forum Lighthouse facility. I had the privilege of hosting Secretary Granholm and Governor Beshear there. They reduced their energy consumption by 25%, so some of the examples that ComEd has been able to deliver on. Their water usage went down by 30%. Their productivity increased. And guess what? Their employee turnover declined. Why? Because all of a sudden people were getting trained on the latest and newest technologies, and they wanted to be part of the journey. So what I take great pride in that is here's a facility that isn't a greenfield, 64-year-old facility. It never stopped operating in that period and was able to use technologies to deliver those outcomes and is one of only half a dozen lighthouse facilities in the United States. So now how do we get that to happen in every existing factory? How do we take that same technology that we've retrofitted the shed with, not just to every aquarium, but to every building? How do we make sure every hospital has the right zoning? My own building, and we're a ComEd customer, just electrified 7 floors with internal EV charging in every, the 65% of the residents said we want one. 65% of the residents don't have an EV, but 65% signed up to get an EV charger on their spot. The internal economics of my building, one building, the rent for the parking spots that have an EV charger is higher, even for people who don't have an EV. That's weird, but interesting. So I think what you find is you also start catalyzing change when these things happen. And so we've got examples in industry, we've got examples in homes and communities. The last example that I'm super excited about, and love to hear more from ComEd on this, is with KB Homes, which is a builder, we just built a community in California that is grid optional. So Patty Pope, one of the leaders doing great work at PG&E, is really struggling with a combination of old infrastructure and environmental issues. And we're a great partner, and we really value what she's trying to do there. But you can buy a home in one of the most expensive zip codes in this country and be not sure you're going to have power. In 2024, that's a strange outcome in the United States, right? So what do? Well, with KB Homes, we created a microgrid for this 200-home community. Every home is fully electrified. It was a DOE grant. The microgrid now connects back to the utility. The utility has control, which is a key element. We use software like AutoGrid to create that demand response, the bidirectionality that Gil was talking about. And that community now has the option where when there's a load event, PG&E can drop load on that community. That community will be fine, and PG&E can make sure critical systems like a hospital, et cetera, or an airport don't go down. And so I think it will also require a combination of distributed energy, and we think between saving on the demand side, there's a big opportunity, and distributed energy resources can take up 40% of the additional capacity. So it'll be like Wi-Fi and cellular working together. That's a bad analogy, but go with me for a minute. And that's the mindset we want to go create. But we have real world examples in industry, in communities, in homes, and in businesses where we can deploy this today.
Well, it might be a good example when you think about how many of us move into new homes today and don't call the phone company to have a hard wire come in.
There you go.
So, but I want to connect this back to Gil. You talked about EVs and the advent of EVs, and they are, a node in this distributed network. And they're on the rise here in Illinois. The statistics are nearly 90,000 registered EVs as of year-end 2023 here in Illinois. So many people seem interested in making the transition to more efficient electrified technologies. Even in Aamir's building, people who don't own them say that they want a charger. But there are barriers. And let's talk about what ComEd is doing. You started a little bit, but I want to go deeper on what are you doing to help break down some of these barriers and promote the transition to a more electrified vehicle ecosystem.
Sure. But before I get there, I just want to piggyback on your microgrid in Patty Poppy's territory in Pacific Gas. We actually have one here in Chicago, Bronzeville. Just a few minutes drive south of here. It's a microgrid. So Bronzeville, in the event that our grid goes down, which is not going to happen, they have the ability to run that neighborhood on their own microgrid. What's great also is that IIT next door, adjacent to it, Illinois Institute of Technology, they have their own microgrid too. And ComEd, we were able to make those two microgrids work with each other and share resources. So if there is some catastrophic event on our grid, those two can actually run. Or if the grid is constrained in that area, we can call on them to help alleviate the grid constraints of that node. Now going to EV. There were about 19,000 EVs registered just a couple of years ago. And so 2 years from that to today, we now have about 90,000 in our state, 80,000 in Northern Illinois in our service territory. There's about, I would say, 2,000 regular EV chargers in our service territory and about 1,000 fast chargers in our service territory. We need more. And what we're doing to address the barriers, number one, we want to make sure that our grid is ready. If somebody wants to buy an electric vehicle today and they want to put a charging station, we want to make sure that our grid is ready for that charging station. That's number one. Number two, we want EV to be an easier choice for our customers. So we developed this EV Toolkit. It's a great app that really guides our customers from that initial interest to owning and operating an electric vehicle and everything in between. What are the things, all kinds of questions that you you need to know about buying, owning, maintaining an EV. And third, we want to make sure that we solve this range anxiety issue. We don't want our customers to be wondering, oh my God, where do I charge next? So we're working very closely with the state, with local governments, the Mayor's Metropolitan Caucus. We have a very strong partnership with them, with the city of Chicago and other jurisdictions, to make sure we use all the federal dollars, all the state dollars, and we also have our own incentives for buying EVs, for putting charging stations in residences, for fleet applications. We combine all of those incentives, we optimize the placement of charging infrastructure, and really solve this range anxiety. And I believe that if we do those three things, ready the grid, make it easier to buy EV, make it an easier choice, and third, to make sure we have the charging infrastructure to solve range anxiety, that those are the three barriers to really propel EV and propel the customer experience.
Reliability, safety, security.
Absolutely.
If I could add just one point, this is another great example about that 70%. So, you know, the obligation and responsibility that you have is to make sure anyone who wants it can do it, right? Now, what the people in the room can start thinking about is, what are the use cases you have within your companies that are easier to solve? So, for example, a delivery vehicle that never leaves the city, that starts from a central hub, goes around and returns to the central hub, is a fantastic electrification use case. Now you combine that central hub with a microgrid, so you're also using clean energy and reliable energy, and all of a sudden you have a fantastic outcome where you can take an entire number of vehicles, convert them to EV, and doesn't require as much public infrastructure because you're returning to that central spot. School buses, city transport, delivery trucks, all come back to this solution. That's why you see Amazon trucks transitioning to EV, because their route structures, they don't have range anxiety, they know precisely where they're going. USPS, UPS. So you can take your entire fleet structure and start breaking it down into saying, which part of my vehicles can I go address? And everyone says, well, you know, long haul trucking isn't ready for EV. You're right. But what percentage of your total miles traveled are long-haul trucking? Well, guess what? For most people, it's less than 20%. The 70% is stuff you can solve. So that's the combination, right? While public infrastructure is for everybody, anywhere, all the time, which is a very high bar utility has to meet, what private business can do is start solving the sort of simpler problems using private capital, and that's exactly what we're helping customers do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the importance in all of this, is really understand those distinct use cases, because what's needed in an urban area is different than what's needed in the suburbs, is different what's needed in rural areas. All right, we're going to do a little bit of a lightning round wrap up here. And a couple things that we didn't get to, so I'm going to let you each decide where you want to end up. As you know, we've talked a lot about this electrification journey. We didn't have a chance to talk about the number of the changing skills and number of people with skills to deploy electricity, and you know, how that transition happens. So that may be one area that we could close. A different area is, I guess it's along those lines, that there really is a labor shortage that's happening. And so how do we think about closing that gap of doubling the size of the grid with a labor shortage of skilled labor in this space? And then the second thing is just, you know, more broadly, what else needs to be disrupted? What have we missed in this conversation? So I'm going to wrap up starting with Aamir. You talked a lot about how the audience can take action to navigate this journey with the 70%. But what else should they be thinking about, either in labor or other disruptors or anything else that we missed?
Anything else that we missed is an open-ended question.
We could go on for hours.
Look, I think the three pieces of advice. One, form your own conviction, not as a company, but as a human being. We are the last generation to truly understand the problem that has time to do something about it. So there's a degree of personal responsibility, and the more capacity you have to influence outcomes, the more responsibility you have, right? And that's just certainly something we believe in, and every conversation I have, people believe in that. T. Boone Pickens, before he passed away, the greatest oil man in Texas, or one of them, was the largest owner of windmills and solar farms in Texas. If he can change his perspective on this, I think the rest of us have a shot. So message number one, form an opinion and think about how you want to not be an optimist or a pessimist, but rather an activist. Do something. Second thing, I think digital is going to be a bigger transformation in infrastructure and energy and sustainability than we realize. When you connect 5 billion people and think of what connectivity felt like in 1995, that's sort of where we are in connectivity of infrastructure. Now think of what the world felt like in 2000, 2005, 2010. So the next 15 years of connectivity of infrastructure is going to change everything. And you have to be ahead of the curve, otherwise it's very easy to get behind. And then the last thing is, I think on this, there's community impacts, right? This is a shared outcome. And forums like the Executive Club, et cetera, whether it's training people, community colleges, investing in great jobs, by the way. We think, I don't know what your numbers are, but we think there's 1 million electricians the country needs. These are fantastic jobs. So how do we train 1 million new jobs in the digital world to do this work? I think is key, but it's a community outcome. And I think this is where cities and communities can come together. So those would be an individual call to action, a commitment to understanding the digital transformation, and an impact to community.
Terrific. Gil, bring us home.
Well, this is such a unique moment in time. You have policy, you have the financial aspects driven by all the federal programs and state programs that we've been talking about here, and technology innovation. All of those stars have aligned. And that's what makes this moment special. So for us, you mentioned about labor. We did a study that if we implement the goals of the Climate Equitable Jobs Act and the goals of the U.S. Climate Alliance in Illinois, that we will create 150,000 net new jobs. The mix will be different. And so it is, my call to action to all of us is to make sure that we are engaged and that this transition is equitable. The last thing we want to do is to create energy haves and have-nots. And this is an opportunity for us at ComEd. We're making sure that the investments that we're making on the grid, the investments that we're making in our customer programs are benefiting low to moderate income customers, those that are mostly impacted by the most serious impacts of climate change. So for all of us here in this room, be engaged, make sure you are educated with all of the, not just the technologies and the policies, but be an activist, be an evangelist on making sure that this transition is orderly, making sure that this transition is equitable, and that it benefits especially those who are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change.
Thank you. Aamir and Gil, this was inspiring, insightful, and really enjoyable. So thank you both, and thank you to the Executives Club for hosting all of us.
I am so glad no one called me because my phone was up here the whole time and it would have disrupted the whole thing. So thank you for not calling me. We have such a fantastic mix of people in this room, from civic leaders to educators to entrepreneurs to the media. So thank you all for being here. I think you heard a pretty clear call to action for what you can go back and do today, thinking about these simple things that we can do. None of us is going to solve this in a big global scale, and that can feel very daunting, but I hope you came away inspired about very practical things that you can start doing soon. So that is it. Thank you all. Please hang around and connect with each other. That's what this is for. If you don't have to run out, but we wanted to be sure that for people who had to go, we ended on time. Thank you all again to our panelists and our moderator, and have a great afternoon.